Hello, hello, and welcome to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter, and with me, as always, is Ansgar Odinson.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
And, we were actually almost not going to do the show today. It's been slow news, and we're just like, there's not much to cover really going on. So I was like, am I really going to get out of bed? Yeah, I don't think, number
Especially
one trending hashtag
stage.
World War III, that's all. Oh, God. All right.
So it sounds like we've got quite a bit of housekeeping today.
Yes. Yeah. And we had I forget what I was going to say. Yeah, we have a lot of housekeeping. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll try to cover because we actually do have, of course, the scheduled show, which we'd like to get to. And if there is any significant breaking news, we'll let you know. There's been a lot of news that under any other sort of circumstances would be breaking, but we've just sort of been like, well, it's Trump. So, yeah, he's okay.
If we went live every single time there was an update on Iran, we would be live 24/7.
Yeah, for the most part. So he has said that the U.S. will not be withdrawing its troops from from Iraq, unless we get paid for all the military bases that we put in, which is kind of funny because they didn't actually ask us to put those military bases in. And in fact, the government at the time, as I recall, did protest slightly to us showing up. But
And I'm curious, A, is there even any precedent for that? And two, what would that even, I mean, can't, that doesn't even make any sense. Like, can you think of a time when you know, a country withdrew that it paid for the bases?
yes, World War II, I think. But or actually, I should say World War One, probably in World War II as well as reparations, more paid for the war, which is essentially really what he's
Right.
asking for. I mean, he's framing it another way, but what he's sitting there saying is, look, you know, you have all these assets and you benefited from us being there. You're going to pay us back. So I said that a little tongue in cheek, and I'm probably because we actually have a historian in the background waiting to come out and smack me and say, "Well, that's not exactly what happened, Nick." So I have to be a lot more careful when we have Dr. Griffith on, because, but yeah, it's. I mean, the idea has been floated before. Usually, it's laughed out of, but it's been
Okay.
stuff similar to it's been done. But
So it's
this is
not
not a.
quite as, you know, flabbergasting as it sounded like to me, but
Well,
still
no, I think
strange.
it's usually flabbergasting to most people. I mean, it's
Okay.
been floated before, but it's not usually taken seriously by anyone. I mean,
Got it.
countries have floated this before and they get upset, but I mean, realistically speaking, and also they can kick us out of the country. If it's a sovereign country, they can kick us out, period. Are they a sovereign country or not? We're going to have to make up our minds on that. We said they
Mhm.
were, we said we wanted them to be. Uh, is that true or is that not? And we're going to have to decide. If it's true, we have to leave. And if we want to negotiate later. But the thing is, I think Trump on this is really just, in his view, it's a negotiation. I'm not sure he's serious about it. And I think he knows his constituents would probably actually rather we left to some extent. But because a lot of them are starting to think we should just be out of the Middle East entirely. But for him, this is just a negotiation. Everything's a negotiation, and this is his opening position. He's gonna.
I think you're giving him too much credit, and I'm usually the one that's a little more fair about Trump between you and me. I think he's just saying, you can't tell me what to do. That's personally, he's in this kind of strong, like, I've got to present myself as strong, like, because I've heard a lot of Trump supporters say, well, if we leave, then Iran wins, and Trump shows that we're weak.
Yeah, but that's kind of my point. Those aren't two mutually exclusive positions. Unless he gets some concessions out of them and then says, well, any other president would have
Fair enough.
folded, and I'm going to do them a favor by taking the money and then leaving because I'm such a nice guy. Or any number of. So, I mean, I think in his view, this is opening a negotiation. He is now negotiating with them. I don't think he cares either way, quite frankly.
Fair enough.
I think you're right. It's his image that he worries most about. So if he can get something out of them for this, but I think that's what he's doing. Yeah,
Okay.
he's having a tantrum. And he's going to keep having a. That's his favorite negotiating tactic, is to have a tantrum. Actually,
And I'd like
I'll
to
have a
add,
tantrum until.
after Pompeo came out and said, listen, we will only target legitimate military sites, Trump said, no, that's not true. We will be targeting cultural sites because they did bad things, so we get to do bad things. So that's interesting.
That was the argument, and that he is once again advocating for a war crime, which is like I said, no longer breaking news, so we didn't bother to go live with it. You know, if the president advocates for a war crime nowadays, we're just sort of like, well, we'll go live when something interesting happens. That's where we are. Also, let's see.
We have one
He,
more bit of Iran thing. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, we also have that the Prime Minister of Iraq has has said, we'll say it's alleged at this point, that that Trump actually called for talks with Iran to happen in Iraq, and then that was used to lure Soleimani, I forget his name right now, the general that we killed, to Iraq for the strike, which again would
Yeah,
also, if proven true, would be a serious issue.
that would be extraordinary, and we may actually ask Dr. Misha about any previous examples of that. So yeah, what the Prime Minister of Iraq is alleging is that Trump reached out to him and said, "We'd like to have peace with Iran. Can you help negotiate that?" He said, "Sure." He actually reasonably successfully negotiated that with this general, and this general was in fact carrying peace papers between Iran and the US in his possession when he landed, and we killed him. That's the allegation, which you're right. Thank you for bringing that one up, but there's just so many serious allegations, I lose track.
You're welcome.
So that one, and then the other one that I'd wanted to bring up is Iran is also in the process of redeploying its military. Most of the assets that they're redeploying appears to be missile systems, and we have not yet determined whether they are doing that defensively, either as in putting them somewhere where they are out of reach of our drones and so on and so forth, or if they are redeploying them in order to strike. Nobody knows, but our forces are on high alert. Basically, we've told all ships in the area, if you're carrying an American flag, get the hell out. And our embassies, bases, all that other stuff is on high alert because they have promised a retaliation. And they're probably, I understand why they feel entitled to it, and they may well be entitled.
And it turns out that we didn't realize one last piece here. It turns out that Soleimani was like a son, so close he was like a son to the supreme leader.
Oh, joy. I didn't know that one either. Yeah. Good. This just keeps getting better. In other news, a informant at Deutsche Bank has said that the loans that Deutsche Bank gave to Donald Trump were underwritten by a Russian bank. This is important because there is no such thing as a Russian bank. Not in the sense that we think of it. If it's underwritten by the Russian bank, that means it's underwritten by Putin. The banks are state-owned. Or in a sense, it's a dictatorship. Anything that's state-owned is owned by Putin. So essentially, Putin underwrote them. Now, for those of you who think that that's a huge, I mean, Putin doesn't underwrite every single loan. He obviously doesn't care. But if it's Donald Trump, and Donald Trump seems to be having some issues with the Russians, I find it highly unlikely that they didn't know at the time who he was, and that didn't come to the attention of Putin. Further, there are concerns of money laundering, and one way to launder money is to have your loans underwritten and then default on the loans and have those loans paid by that organization. Because Russian banks are in a position and willing to do that under certain circumstances, and specifically if instructed to by Putin, most businesses won't do business with those Russian banks. Deutsche Bank will, and they have done this. And it looks, I mean, this is, if you wanted to launder money, this is kind of how it's done. And Trump is already in their concerns about that. That may be what he was doing either here or in other places. This is just one snitch or one whistleblower at Deutsche Bank who says that this is what happened and it is being looked into. But I think that this is actually a very serious issue. It's one of the ones that's been under the radar. There are two that have been under the radar that nobody's talking about. The first one is what's happening with Deutsche Bank in Russia, because that's profound. I think somebody is seriously going after him for money laundering. And I think this is a part of that. So I'm curious to see where that goes. But it reminds me a bit of Watergate, where it was the small story on page 6 that nobody was paying attention to, but was like, hey, there's some weird stuff going on here that nobody's paying. And that's what I see with Deutsche Bank. The other one that I see that with is Bolton has agreed he will testify if called by the Senate.
Interesting.
Oh, that's big.
Yeah. If we can get the Senate to call witnesses, of course.
Well, it's only their obligation. I mean, there's no evidence they're actually going to do it. You're correct. Mitch McConnell said he won't call witnesses.
Well, remember, these are the same Republicans that told us that the process enshrined in the Constitution was unconstitutional.
Yes, they did make that argument, and I think it's I do think it's staggering that they won't. We've covered that. It's their obligation to call witnesses. That's part of, and they say, well, no, it's the House's obligation because they're the ones sending us the articles of impeachment. No, it's their obligation to decide that they think something happened and there should be a trial. The Senate holds the trial, and in a trial you call witnesses. It's utterly insane. So, but here's what's interesting about it. So far, every major player has said they will not testify and has refused to testify before Congress, which is illegal. That is working its way up through the courts, but will almost certainly fail in the courts, and which means that they'll be forced to testify. But by that point, it's already been moved to the Senate. So it's kind of a moot point. It's going to take 8 months before there's a ruling on this. But they have been actively refusing to testify before Congress. I want to say that's a felony. I know that lying to Congress is a felony, but I forget about refusing to testify. They haven't pushed it yet. They had enough to impeach, and they were hoping that the Senate would do its job. The Senate's now saying it won't. This is the first major administration official who says, hey, I'll testify. Everyone else has, literally at the risk of committing a felony, said they will not testify. He says he will. Why? We've discussed this briefly before. I think he actually wants to undermine Trump. I think that's a number of reasons why this is happening as well. Trump knows that his number one thing has always been war with Iran. And if he gets closer to it, maybe Bolton will not, will start to play ball. But here's the thing. There was a conversation between Bolton and Donald Trump, we mentioned this earlier, in which Donald Trump was talking about releasing the money to the Ukraine. And Bolton said, it is in the nation's best interest that you release the money. It's really interesting that he said that, because that's how the oath reads. That's how the oath reads. So what he's in trouble for violating is that element of his oath of office, and for violating that element of his job. And that's actually criminal behavior. So why would Bolton frame it that way? Could be an accident, but there's another interesting accident, which is how did this conversation get to the New York Times?
Right.
When that I'm aware of, Bolton's the only other one who knows that he said that. So Bolton probably released it.
He probably used that language very specifically to cover his ass in the future, and so that he could use it in just this way.
Yeah, I think both to cover his ass, and so that if as a tool later if he needed it. I don't think he knew that there was going to be an impeachment, but he knew it was a possibility. They can say, "Oh, look, I told Trump that he was violating his oath," which is essentially what he can now say, and he did it anyway. I knew, and you remember we had ProLib on, and ProLib said, "How long before Bolton betrays Trump?" And I said, "I think he's already done it." I think he's already said it's like a past thing. I think it's ongoing. I think Bolton wants to take him down, and the fact that he's willing to testify like this. So Bolton is huge, and I think he wants to take down the administration. That's it doesn't seem like big news, but the fact that he says he's willing to testify, he wants to take Trump down. I can reach no other conclusion from that, and I think he's got kind of what he needs to do it, because that's already been released by the New York Times. So that's a staggering issue, and I'm curious to see where it goes. But I think that's about it. And then the only last thing I wanted to cover was that, I lost 50 Twitter followers in the last 5 or 6 days. Check yours. I'm curious to see how many other people. At first, just sitting there going, who unfollowed me? I didn't realize.
Yeah, Twitter purge.
And most of them were people, it was a Twitter purge. Most of them were people who were, had lost their accounts or got their accounts suspended, including ProLib. And ProLib has been a guest on this show repeatedly. We sincerely appreciate his showing up. Yeah, why did he get blocked from Twitter? He got blocked. His account was suspended.
Yes. So he put he made a tweet that was an @Twitter support, and he took screenshots of Donald Trump threatening to blow up target cultural sites in Iran, and said, hey, listen, this is against your terms of service. He's making direct threats of violence, right? Well, in the Twitter, now to be fair, to cover all sides of this, in the Twitter terms of service, it is actually in the fine print that, leaders of nations, military, high brass, these people are exempt from the Twitter terms of service for whatever reason. However, even then, you could say that he was pointing out the hypocrisy that they're allowed to get away with these sorts of things. That is what got his account suspended. Not just, hey, you have to delete your tweet. His account is gone, suspended. So that's what's going on with ProLib.
And yeah, even if Trump was technically not violating the rules of service because he actually has a separate set of rules that apply to him, reporting Trump isn't a violation of the rules of service,
Right.
especially if you think he's violating them. So why? So that is a bit chilling, and we're all chewing on that because all he did was report an account that was violating the terms of service to the best of his understanding. That's all he did. It just happened to be the president of the United States. But he's right by his understanding of the rules then, and arguably what really the rules appear to be if you don't look at the fine print. So that's an interesting one. We'll stay on it, and if there's any other breaking news anywhere at any time that's really big, we will let you know. In the meantime, we are here also to cover another news story that we hit on only very briefly, unfortunately. There is a massive wildfire. Do we have the video or the image of the fire from space?
We do not, but I can be pulling that up. There's
Perfect.
several
Thank you.
of them.
Yeah, there's several spectacular ones, and I'd like to see if we can get one in the middle window. It's astonishing how big that fire is. And it is, last I heard, it is the size of California, the size of the entire state of California. It is all over. You're hopefully about to see, I think we can show you here.
Actually, I'm looking at PolitiFact, by the way. That image is a fake. It's getting a false. So I don't want to put that particular image up.
I think that's a good call. So we'll see if we can get an image for you of the fires. The ones that I've seen, assuming that I've seen a legit one, was pretty spectacular. They are basically everywhere. They are affecting absolutely everybody. They have also had they are fueled by the changes in our environment, but are also actually creating changes in our environment, in the environment for Australia. And Australia is a big enough country that it is big enough, it's a big enough country that those fires at this point affect everybody on the planet. So we have with us today two people to discuss it. We have Dr. Misha Pineapple collaborator and chipmunk genocidist Griffith. We have gotten a few YouTube complaints for her genocidal tendencies. We have argued that marsupials don't count, and we are willing to go. Actually, I don't know if they're a marsupial. I was thinking marsupial because I was thinking kangaroos, but at any rate, we are willing to go sort of to bat for Dr. Griffith for it. I mean, I don't care, but Kitty was just like, wouldn't it be nice if? I was like, okay, fine. We also have Atheist Pastor with us, and both of them actually have some very interesting and unique experience with this and insights into this. So thank you all for joining us, and let's talk about these fires. How big are they?
Well, it's actually not one fire. It's over 200 fires throughout the coast. If you look at a map of Australia, it's you kind of circle the coastline, and that's where all the fires are. That also happens to be where the major population areas are. So a lot of the problems with these fires is the fact that they are close to people, or people are close to the fires. And that makes them dangerous. That makes them a huge problem.
Yeah,
Yep.
Sorry.
Please.
I was just going to say where we are fortunate is they haven't encroached on our major cities here yet, although they have taken we as Dr. Griffith was saying, we do have the majority of our population living on or near the coast. So the areas that it is affecting, and even just as far as things like air quality in the major cities, it's I think Canberra, which is generally known for its fairly clean and fresh air, was worse than any city in the world, which is crazy for Canberra. And that was the other day. Sydney hasn't been much better. Melbourne, fortunately, has missed a lot of it, but certainly Sydney and Canberra have probably caught the brunt. Just to give you a bit of an idea, I'm in the state of New South Wales, which is the state that Sydney's in. Canberra's smack in the middle of us. We have currently got 132 fire incidents active at the moment, including some that are the size of Rhode Island.
Oh my God. I've been watching some of the videos of some of the smoke plumes in general. They are absolutely massive, and they're crossing oceans. Some of these fires are so big. Now, the other day, we actually covered a story where people were actually trapped on the coast. What was it, Nick? Was it like 3,000 people?
Yeah, there was, and I had forgotten, and I wanted to do a follow-up with that, but there's been other news recently that's been a little closer to home. Not to say it's more or less important, but yeah, there was a town that had been overrun by the fires. That it seemed like the people got out, but they got out to the beach, and the fire was approaching the beach, and there wasn't enough boats to get them off. So I don't know what happened, but it seemed
that's
like
actually
Dunkirk.
there's a few towns like that. So with the way that the geography of Australia works is because we've got so much, I guess, population living close to the coast, we do have a lot of bushland next to it. And what we've got is going right down pretty much not too far from the coastline is what's called the Great Dividing Range, so which is a mountain region, which is why a lot of Australia's population is based on the coast, because we've got big mountain ranges to get over. When the settlements were initially happening, it wasn't practical to go over these huge mountains. So unfortunately for a lot of people, if the roads are closed, the only direction they've got to go is the beach. And we've had a few cases where people are having to be evacuated by the Australian Navy from beaches. We've had, it's unfortunately there's more than a couple of situations where that's happened, where sometimes in some cases it's sort of smaller populations, but in other cases, I was talking to some friends who are in a town called Maria. Now they were finally able to get out today, but Maria is a small coastal holiday town. There was 3,500 people on the showground or the sporting oval there, which is sort of roughly the size of a soccer pitch. Run out of food, no water, still had reception, and so we were able to talk to them. But if the concern they had was that we were meant to have some fairly bad winds and heat on Thursday, had that have hit without a break where they could get out, they would have been trapped there, and basically the only option is the beach.
Mhm. The part of fire science is understanding not just the weather, which is a huge part of the fire, but how fire behaves. Fire moves faster uphill than down because it's preheating the fuel as it goes. And so if you've got anywhere to go in a fire, go downhill. Part of the problem of Australia and the geography being so incredibly big is part of the same problem that happened in the Camp Fire in Paradise, California last year. I used to live near there. I've had several friends who lost their homes in the Camp Fire. Thankfully, they didn't lose any lives or were injured, but a lot of people were killed. Part of the problem with the Camp Fire and Paradise, California in general is that it is somewhat higher elevation. Number one, it's very dry, and there is one road going in and going out, one major highway, and everyone lives on roads that come fan out from that one major highway. And so trying to get out of town, trying to evacuate was impossible. People died in their cars as they were trying to drive out of town. Also, there's a lot of older people, and you have to keep that into consideration. These people can't move quickly. They might need help. Read lots of stories of trying to clear out evacuate the people in hospitals and nursing homes. And that can be a huge problem if you do not have enough people to physically lift and remove these people in time. They'll die in their beds. So having Australia, many of the towns are like that. They don't have these intricate webs of highways that we have here on the east coast of the United States, where every town has, 38 or 40 different roads that lead out to somewhere else. Uh, a lot of these towns have one road, and a lot of these roads go along the coastline, and so the populations are on the uphill side of the highway, and then you cross the highway, and there's the beach. And the beach was the only choice for these people to go. And we have to keep in mind, not every beach you can land a boat on. Zodiacs at best, kayaks, but how many people does a kayak hold? And Zodiacs, the small rubber boats, 8, 10 people at most. If you've got a population of 3 to 4,000 people on these boats, and some of them cannot walk, that's going to be a very difficult challenge getting these people off the beach.
So,
Yeah.
please.
I was just gonna say you're 100% right what you're saying with our roads. Essentially, because the population lives on such a narrow sort of, I guess, area generally with the ocean on one side and mountain ranges on the other. It's one road going down, or maybe a couple, and then a few connecting some of the towns, and then the main ones going inland. So it's very the geography is very different to what you have in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And Atheist Pastor, do you go by Chris, or am I? Can I
Chris,
use that?
Yeah.
So, what are the people feeling there right now? What's sort of the mood in Australia? How many people are affected by this? Aren't affected by this? What's going on culturally and with people there?
Well, the mood's actually pretty good. And when I say that, it's when things like this happen, I guess it can go one of two ways. It's either people go into a panic, or people really dig in and, I guess, support each other. And one thing that's really been happening in Australia is, I guess, we're supporting each other. Everyone's sort of donating, everyone's contributing as much as we can. I had a situation where I had friends of mine who were stuck in the town I mentioned, Maruya. Now, their business is they look after animals. So they knew that, yes, they could get out, hopefully at some point, but they had 2 trailers full of animals, and what could they do? So I put a message out on Facebook last night and sort of said, look, if anyone can help, this would be, here's what they've got: a couple of alpacas, ducks, all these animals. And the inundation of messages that I had it was amazing. It's I've never quite seen anything like it. So there was probably about 40 or 50 genuine offers to put these people up, look after the animals. So that's the mood here at the moment. It's it's strengthening our resolve. I mean, look, there is worry. I mean, I had a situation where my kids were actually stuck for 2 days on the other side of the fires while they were at their grandparents' place. I've never been so scared in my life, even though they were with trusted people and there was plans in place.
That had
And
to
there's a
be a
lot of
tremendous amount of anxiety.
I've never ever been so stressed in my life. I didn't sleep for probably almost 2 days, and it was horrible experiences as a father. And unfortunately, my situation isn't unique. So my in-laws, where they are, they've had days where they've been blocked in. Potentially, they're going to lose their. Oh, they shouldn't lose their house. It looks like they're pretty safe, but we had days where they thought that. My brother-in-law, similar situation where his house is right on the line of the fires. They've had the evacuation and just have everything ready to go sort of message for about 2 weeks. The scary thing is, I think it's with the fires and the way that they burn here. So a lot of these trees are eucalyptus. So eucalyptus, when we have a drought, there isn't moisture. Eucalyptus oil burns ridiculously hot. Now we've had melted like cars that have melted, or parts of them have melted
Jesus.
to liquid metal. So that's how hot these things can get. And when the wind kicks up, we'll have a 40-degree day, which 40 degrees roughly about 100, I think, on Fahrenheit. And then we'll have these winds. So
110.
what'll happen is the winds will actually blow the embers. They catch on these dry eucalyptus trees and bang, up they go, they explode, and then we've got another area that's on fire. So when these winds come in, it can just hit, and that's the scary thing, sort of not knowing where the wind's going to take it, where it's going to hit, where it's going to ignite. There's just that uncertainty. So
And
we,
a sufficiently big enough fire creates its own weather. That simple physics, heat goes up, the hot air goes up, and it sucks cold air into the fire. Cold air is a little bit drier than warm air, and it's going to be a problem. In Shasta County a year ago, was it a year ago? That I guess it's 2 years ago now, almost 2 years ago now, that they had their giant fire there. And that's where I used to be a forest fire. I was a wildland firefighter.
that's what I was going to ask. How do you know so much about this? You were actually a firefighter.
Yeah, I was a wildland firefighter.
I don't think we can bring you on anymore. You're starting to make everyone else look bad. It's like, oh, you're a professor.
What hasn't she done, right?
She's like, Nick, I remember when I was jumping out of an airplane with my firefighting equipment, and there was a fire right below me, and I was just like, I'm bored.
I was not a hot shot. I was strictly,
You will always be a hot shot to us, but please continue.
Hot shots are the guys that jump out of airplanes, and of course, this is a problem in Australia, is because how the flora and fauna is, they don't have a lot of regions that they can use hot shots. Just because the shape of the eucalypt tree is such that you don't want to jump into them. They'll skewer you.
Especially when they're on fire, I would assume.
Yeah, well,
I'm not a fireman, but
they put people a little bit away from the fire when they do that. But a lot of the firefighting in Australia, if they're going to bring people into remote areas, it's done by helicopter, and they're rappelling down. That's really scary. I can't imagine rappelling from a helicopter like that. I was stuck on an engine. Engine 2483 out of Bernie, California. Anyway, but what I was going to say about the Shasta County fire is that the people pulling together is the most amazing thing to watch. I had a lot of friends following them on Facebook as they were being evacuated from one place, and then that place was endangered, and they were evacuating to another place. There's a local community college I went to, Shasta College in Redding, California, and a friend of mine was the dean of the business school, and part of their business school was an farm. They had a teaching farm, so they had lots of animals, and they opened it up to evacuees with animals. So people could bring all their pets. People could bring some of their livestock or their prize horses and bring them to the college. And they said it was amazing to watch. Not only people coming in and saying, "Oh, I'm glad I have someplace to put my horse that was safe." They had people just drive up and unload a couple of 50-pound bags of cat food. They said, "We hear you have cats out here. Here's some cat food," and drive off. They didn't know anybody. They were just dropping off cat food or pig feed or whatever they needed at this site. So it's the people pulling together that are so amazing to watch. I mean, that makes me feel better when even if there's a fire. But big fires are very scary because you can't, it's very hard to determine where they're going to go. The sophistication in modeling and weather, understanding the weather and understanding the movements is going to help you place assets, etc., or know how to evacuate people. But you're not going to predict exactly how the fire is going to go. Fires don't just go through and burn everything and move on. Fires leave certain spots unburnt. Fires will sit in a certain place and not move. At night, generally speaking, firefighters count on the fire doing what they call laying down, in that it releases its intensity because of the coolness of the evening, but it's going to pick right back up. And if the wind is blowing, all bets are off. But fire doesn't move in a uniform fashion. It's going to move uphill faster than it's going to move downhill. And it's going to leap things. One of my jobs that I had when I was a firefighter, because we had sufficient people on the hoses, they'd hand me what they call a water pump. We called it a piss pump. It was 5 gallons of water in a big metal tank, and you wore it, and you had a trombone sort of squirter.
Indian water pumps.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. And that was my job. I'd head out in front of the fire and look for hot spots and put those out with my little 5 gallons of water. It's silly, but it was eyes forward. And one of the first fires I went on, they handed me the pump and sent me out, and I'm looking, and the wind was catching up. It was in very tall pondosa pine, and I was seeing way too many hot spots, and I came running back and said, "Hey, this thing is going." And they said, "Okay, go down the wet line," which is where the hose was, and help them at that point. And I got to the end of the hose with the 2 other firefighters. I was carrying hoses down to them so they could continue on this fire line, and the fire crowned out, meaning that it went into the crown of the trees and over us.
Oh, wow.
And it does that instantaneously. When people talk about trees exploding, trees explode once they're preheated and everything. And this thing crowned out. It went right over the top of us. It sounds like a freight train and feels like you are in an oven. Now, we were trained to use fire tents, what we call shake and bake bags, back then, which were aluminum tents, aluminum foil tents that you put on and laid down on the ground, and hopefully the fire would pass over you. I never had to use it. In this situation where it crowned out, we were close enough to the engine, and we had laid down a little wet line, so we could follow that back to the engine. So we ran like crazy to get back. It was pretty darn scary because we could barely see anything. It was hot, it was windy, and as like I said, it sounded like a freight train going over you. And we spent several days on that fire, but we made it out and moved the truck to a different place, and that place was burned over where we had been. In fact, I
Wow.
went back the next day and found where the hose had been. I found the brass connections, and I found the ash trail of where the hoses were, but everything was gone. And only the brass was left, only the nozzles and everything. So yeah, the movement of fires is somewhat unpredictable, and so you just have to understand how they're try to understand how they're going to move, and try to get firefighters try to get in front of them as best they can, and we have to get the population out of the way, because the priority number 1 is people, priority number 2 is structures, and priority number 3 is the integrity of the biosystem.
Well, so let me just do 2 quick things. I want to hit the super chats because we've had 2 of them. First, from Kitty the Atheist for $2. I'm so sad you have been ignoring my ads. I'm so sorry. She was able to find more video on ProLib, and she's been dropping those, and I hope she'll continue to drop a couple more times the video on what happened with ProLib, and maybe we'll be able to get back to that. But thank you for finding that information, and ProLib is a friend of the show's, and that is very important to stay on. And then also was that 5 pounds? No, that's not pounds. I don't know what that unit of. I'm going to end up having to memorize all these. I'm going to read them, but 5 of some unit of currency. Thank you very much from Mr. President 99. Nothing funny about the fire and the damage and the lives lost, but Australia won't cut its CO2 emissions this year. Sorry for the bad joke. Yeah, and it sounds like did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, we're actually on track to hit all of our targets under international obligations as far as cutting emissions. So that's not accurate.
I think what he was joking about all the burning adding to the
burning will put them over the top for the emissions. It took me a minute to catch that too.
I had
the media narrative here has been there's been a few playing political football with it to do with climate change sort of unfairly. So there's a few misconceptions in there. So I thought I'm just so used to hearing them now that I just thought.
A quick question is, I've heard a lot to do on social media, particularly about a lot of these fires being as a result of arson.
Yeah, most of them are.
Most of them are arson. Okay.
There was
Really?
one volunteer firefighter who's been charged with lighting 7 of them.
Oh my
7.
God.
Yeah, they are. There was one in Sydney the other day at a suburb called Voyager Point, which is it's a suburb that's sort of surrounded by a bit of bush. That was deliberately lit. Unfortunately, when you get 40 degrees and winds, the arsonists know that it's going to cause impacts. So that's
Right.
that's when they go and do it.
Arson's going to
And
happen every year,
yeah,
unfortunately.
and most of them, look, lightning strikes will cause some. Sometimes you can have accidents like, or it can be something as simple as, some clown throwing a cigarette butt out a window on the highway. But most,
Decaying foliage can spark up.
yeah,
A lost tire on a trailer lit the fire in Shasta County.
wow,
That older couple was driving their trailer up 299 West, and the one of the wheels fell off the trailer, and they didn't know it, and it was creating sparks as it was dragging
Oh my.
the wheel along.
Oh,
The
wow.
campfire in Paradise was caused by wind pushing electrical wires into PG&E high voltage wires into the surrounding trees. So there's a lot of different reasons fires start, and arsonists are interesting because they treat arson as a psychological problem. They don't treat it as a property crime. Sometimes it is a compulsion. Sometimes it is it has been volunteer firefighters who, uh, you know, some of them want the overtime, and some of them just want to see the world burn, which is a little creepy. One thing I want to point out about most of the firefighters, the wildland firefighters that are out in the bush in Australia, they're volunteers.
Mhm.
They are not full-time firefighters, and good on them, because these are people, they get paid when they're working. When they're not when they're not fighting fires, they're doing their own jobs or whatever, but they're out there as volunteers, and they're putting themselves out. In America, we have huge resources put into our national forests and our state systems, like California used to be called the Department of Forestry. Now it's called Cal Fire. Professional and unionized firefighters that are working all year around. It used to be a seasonal job. Now it's an all year round job. But a lot of the people in Australia, they don't work under that system. Now, Australia does have what they call the Australasian Inter-Service Incident Management System, or AIMS, which is a system that was built in the 1980s. I have a friend who helped to build it in California. Australia adopted it, and it is a chain of command that allows for different managers to work on these areas. So it's not like you've got somebody, oh, you go find some food for all these firefighters, and you figure out what the weather is going to be, and you do this. It is very highly trained professionals and scientists who are out there putting together these incident commands and trying to keep uh, uh, take charge of all these, and which is why you've got a lot of people lives being saved. Is that we've learned how to manage these systems a little bit better.
in Australia too, in New South Wales in particular, where I am, pretty much every town has got what's called an RFS, or a rural fire service, which is the volunteer setup that that Dr. Griffith was just talking about, and it is purely made up of volunteers. There's no one apart from the very senior people who run the entire organisation who are paid. We've obviously got our regular firefighters who they look after, I guess, the incidents in the town, but the rural is 100% volunteer. And look, most of these towns that are being burnt now, they'll have sort of 4 or 5 volunteer firefighters. But unfortunately, because of how far it's spread out, it really the resources are cut very thin. One fire truck against a big fire is not going to do anything. So there's certain areas that they have to abandon, and sort of go and fight the fire on fronts where they can.
Mhm.
Fortunately, there is a lot of money and infrastructure that has gone into and regularly does go into the rural fire service. But I guess when you have incidents like this, there's only so much manpower and so much you can do. In fact, even one of our former prime ministers is out on the front line. He's famously been in the RFS for years. Even when he was prime minister and there was fires, he'd go out and fight them, which is fairly uncommon for a prime minister to do. But he's been out there for a couple of months now fighting the fires. So it's something that's very much in the Australian culture.
The
And
sheer
you
I was gonna say the sheer magnitude of these fires is absolutely incredible. It's rather unprecedented from what I understand. You had
It
hit
is.
on earlier about that there's a lot of politics involved in this particular. I guess we can call it a national disaster, really. Um, but could you tell us a little more about that? Because I don't think any of us really are in touch with the political side of this.
Yeah. So I guess to give you a very brief background. So in Australia, we've got two major parties. We've got the Liberal
Mhm.
Party, which is you call it a centre-right party. And then we've got the Labor Party, which you'd call a centre-left party. Our parties tend not to go to veer as far to the right or left as you would in the US. So at the moment, the Liberal Party, which is the centre-right party, is in power. Now, the Liberal Party and the Labor Party have been
So the Liberals are
fairly.
center right?
The Liberals are centre-right, which is very
Interesting.
confusing for Americans.
Yes, it is.
Yes. So, so with the two major parties, whenever there's a disaster, that generally the rule is the politics stay out of it. They get on with the job, they get the job done. So the leader of the opposition, he hasn't gone on the attack. The problem we've got is keyboard warriors. We've got a minor party, the Greens, who have gone on the attack and sort of started playing a little bit of political football. And the media has just gone absolutely feral, especially on the Prime Minister. And look, some criticism, is fair enough, but most of it isn't fair enough. And there's a lot of people who are starting to, I guess, use what is a national disaster and an unprecedented disaster, and they're using it for political point scoring. Look, online's probably the worst. I think there's people who are acting in well, it's disgusting actually. People are acting in a disgusting manner online, trying to score political points for their team when my country's burning. It's frustrating, and there's some politicians who are doing it as well, but generally it's the media and I guess commentators who are beating it up.
I just put, by the way, in the chat a link to the Red Cross donations. This is for the disaster relief going on in Australia right now. So if you want to help out, Red Cross is an amazing organization. You can trust them.
And you can also donate directly to the fire services if
RFS,
you in Victoria and in New South Wales, that they have systems set up that you can give money to individual fire brigades, etc. So if you wanted to help that way and didn't want to go through the Red Cross, that's another way. You have to search a little bit on the internet, but it's readily there. And
Well,
they'll be
they also had a thing for volunteers, and so I volunteered Dr. Griffith to go. Just we will put those in the description as well, so they're always there.
I would go, but I'm here for personal issues. We actually talked when I was in the Department of Forestry. We talked a lot about, hey, what are we going to do during the winter? And people were saying, yeah, we're going to go to Australia and fight fires down there. But that was ages ago. One of the most important things to understand about these Australian fires, and I think Chris can help us out on that, is that they started very early this year. And the nature of fires early in the season versus late in the season is very dramatically different.
Yeah, they started in September. They weren't great, but they weren't unusual. It was just the number that we had, but it's certainly November, December has been when it's really ramped up, which is our fire season. So
Mhm.
we did get a couple early. It's sort of been exacerbated by the fact we've been in drought this year, and it is a fairly bad drought. That combined with, look, it's just we've just had it's not so much the temperature, but it's the combination of the temperature and wind. That it's
Mhm.
sort of it's a series of really, really bad circumstances that have all kind of combined to give us what we've got here.
Mhm. The someone asked in the chat asked about setting fires uh, in order to stop fires ahead of time. That's called prescribed burning.
Right.
That
No, I
is
actually,
happens.
wait, are they talking about that? Or are they talking about arsonists who start fires in order to stop them?
Oh, no, no, no. Prescribed burning is something that's
Okay.
very common in rural areas and forested areas. The idea is to set a fire hopefully early in the season so
Yeah.
that it reduces the fuel load. But you've got to have the perfect weather to do it. You've got to have the personnel to do it. You've got to get permission from all sorts of people to do it because the lands are not always owned by the government or the regional authorities. Some of them are parks, some of them are private lands. And so all of these people have to sign on to do these prescribed burnings, and they have to be controlled,
Yeah.
and they're dangerous. They can get out of hand very quickly, which is why they have to judge the weather ahead of time and that sort of thing. I've been on a few prescribed burns, um, and you don't want them get out of hand because that's really embarrassing when your firefighters start a fire. So
They
so
are
they're
very
very
common.
careful,
Yeah. I was going to,
and
sorry.
and
Prescribed fires are very common? Or?
yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
the
Sorry.
science.
Sorry, the delay's causing me some issues. I don't mean to speak over you.
Sorry.
Sorry.
But the prescribed burning, there's the science is still out on it. That there have been multiple studies. They haven't done longer term studies over about 20 years, uh, and they're also looking into the Aboriginal tendency to start fires as well. The Aboriginal people of Australia have been around for 50,000 years on the continent, and so they used to start fires as well. But of course, that's very hard to find in the archaeological evidence of, was this started by an Aboriginal group, or was this started by lightning? So it's historically
Actually,
and
sorry,
scientifically.
I'll correct you on that.
Sure.
We definitely do have evidence of Aboriginal backburning. In
Mhm.
fact, some of the I believe it was Cook when he was doing his voyages actually observed Aboriginal backburning. So backburning in Aboriginal communities, it's actually something that's been passed down, and there definitely is archaeological evidence that
Mhm.
supports that.
But we don't
And
know how
backburning is
often they do it.
another term for the same thing. The sort of burning ahead. Well, no, so backburning isn't to burn up the backburning isn't necessarily done preemptively before fires start. It's once fires have started. Backburning is an attempt to
Mhm.
cut off the fire from turning by
It might,
cutting
yeah.
off its source by actually creating by burning up all the fuel in one. But yeah,
That
just to
that
clarify,
might
right?
be a terminology difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, in
Okay.
Australia we call it back burning. I guess what you'd call prescribed burning. It does happen. We do have a period of time where we need to do that. We had a shorter back burning season this year, and look, we did have a few issues. Frustratingly, in in the Gippsland region in Victoria, in particular, we actually had protesters who protested against the back burning because they were worried it would do damage to environmental habitats. And the sad irony is all those environmental habitats plus a lot more are gone now. So backburning is something that will very regularly happen. And with the RFS or the Rural Fire volunteers, normally they'll get together once a week, and that's what they'll do. So on a Saturday, as it approaches Saturdays and Sundays on the weekends, that's when they'll do a lot of their backburning or prescribed burning.
But they can only burn so much.
That's
And
right.
once a fire gets going and the winds are carrying it, a backburn is, even a nicely burned patch it's going to jump it. Fire moves the way it wants to move. The
Absolutely.
fires in Northern California 2 years ago in Shasta County, they jumped Interstate 5, which is a 4-lane freeway with the large median. They jumped the Sacramento River, which is at least 100 yards wide at certain points, and it jumped a lake. It jumped Whiskeytown Lake.
Jesus.
In fact, there were at Oak Bottom Marina, there were boats in the middle of the lake, fiberglass boats that were melted down to the water line, that they caught fire in the middle of the lake. So the idea of the guy in the White House saying, "Oh, all you have to do is go out and rake leaves," is
I don't know what nobody ever
know,
said. Raking leaves stops forest fires. I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't want to hear any of that comment.
Speaking of which, I've heard a lot of people claiming online that a lot of this is because of improper forestry management, that things haven't been done to take the proper precautions. That's one of the reasons it's so big. Is there any truth to that?
Look, only in so much as there was the protest in certain regions. We haven't been able to do as much as we would normally need to, but that's only because, as Dr. Griffith was saying, you need the right conditions. It's got to be, if you've got a windy day, that fire will jump, and especially in Australia, especially during a drought, that fire starts, you've got to make sure you can control it. So we have had a bit of that, but no, look, the environmental management, and I guess the fire management in Australia, because it's something we deal with every year. Like we have fires every year. So we've gotten very good, I guess, at managing it, preparing for it. So even though I guess we're going through what we're going through, we're probably the best placed country because we are prepared for something like this. It's just so. But yeah, no, it's as far as yeah, all the stories about it hasn't been managed correctly, they're garbage.
Gotcha.
I can tell you. I live surrounded by national parks and bushland, and I can tell you it's managed as best it can be.
And when they're talking about bushland, it's not just the when you're thinking of bush, it is a forest system that's not really a forest. In many places, there are eucalypt forest and other types of forests. There's even rainforests in a handful of places. But aside from open grassland, the bush is 8 to 10 feet high in many places. I'm talking about down in the southern part of Victoria, Chris, near the 12 Apostles. When you walk around there, it's 10 to 12 foot high bush. It is so tightly packed together that you cannot walk through it. You have to cut the trails through it when you go trail hiking or anything like that.
And that's not even our most dense.
Yeah, it's horribly dense. It burns very, very quickly and very hot. And here's another problem with it. In many of the bush areas, there's no economic what's the term I'm using? It's not got economically viable in any way, shape, or form. There is no harvestable timber. In many situations, what makes for good forestry is the economic viability of the crop, of the trees. Understanding that people are going to take care of the trees better if they're not aesthetically important or important for watershed areas, but people can cut them down and use them and build houses out of them. Those tend to be very well managed forests because people are very concerned about those areas. It's the areas that are left to be natural, to grow up. That's where a lot of the fuel builds up. That microcosm of the rotting logs and the multiple generations of plants that create that fuel ladder goes up into the trees. That if left alone, that's going to burn, and that's a natural part of what it does.
And we do have a lot of national parks in Australia too.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon. It's and I guess it's part of the natural beauty, and we haven't got we haven't got a need to develop certain areas. I mean, as far as size goes, we're the size of the US, with a population that's I think you guys are about 350 million. We're at 25.
Yeah.
So with the majority concentrated in 3 or 4 cities.
Wow.
And a lot of the prescribed burns, they're not just for creating the health for the older trees, which they tend to do, except the science is kind of out on that. They find that the trees kind of shrink in size, and they don't know if it's if the bark is burning, and that's why the measurements are smaller. It's forests are competitive. All of the plants in the forest are trying to get to the sunlight, and forests themselves have multiple generations. You're not going to get the mature plants, the mature certain generations of plants growing at once. You're going to start with grass, and then the plants are going to get bigger and bigger as they grow up. So you have multiple generations of plants, and you have to understand what has to come first. But a lot of the fires are set or have been set in the past to improve grassland, to keep, rather than cutting down brush and cutting down trees, they were just set to create more and more and more grassland, which is not the natural progression of how you want to use this land, but it is the best for cattle and sheep and the Asian water buffalo, which was a real disaster when the British brought that into Australia in the 1830s. They brought in these water buffaloes to eat, and then they found out people didn't want to eat them, and so the population exploded, and they're really pretty bad at grazing and overgrazing, and sheep are terrible at overgrazing areas. Sheep don't their teeth are such that the cows nip grass so that they leave the root system. Sheep have a tendency to pull up the grass and eat it by the roots, thereby taking a lot of the root system out. Therefore, you've got erosion after the sheep if they've been left in an area too long. That's why you have to keep sheep moving around, and you need sheepdogs, and you need large pastures and everything. So yeah, it depends on who's grazing on what land, if it's going to be a good client livestock for that area.
And the majority on the East Coast are cows and sheep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So let me get to two quick things. First of all, we did have another Mr. President, €5. He donated to the Red Cross Australia and suggested that we put that in the description, which we are going to do. And the currency is the euro. Geez, Mr. Soutter, it's only the second largest currency in the world. Well, first of all, yeah, precisely. It's only the second. Why would I care about any other countries or any other currencies? I'm an American.
Exactly.
There's no point in being an American if I can't just ignore it. I'm also a little tired. I've gotten the euro correct before. I've gotten it right. I'm tired. I'm looking at a very small screen, and I probably need a new pair of glasses. I've had the same pair for like 10 years. So give me a break.
And also, it's not American money, so who cares?
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's I had to memorize the South Korean I've memorized that one. I memorized a couple others, but frankly, really, to be serious for a minute, Europe isn't contributing to NATO. So frankly, I just think that okay. So so thank you for that. I did have a question. I'd like to talk about actually, now I'm going to roll this up into maybe 3 questions. A, when did they start and how long have they been going for? B, how long, if it's answerable or if anyone's even got a guess, will this be continuing for? And C, the real question, that's just a frame, the real question, what is the impact of this on the future? What's going to happen to Australia? What is going to happen, do they think, economically, to the people, and to the environment? What are we looking at as the final tally, if we can even begin to guess that?
Sure. So they've been going since I mean, look, we get fires all year round, but really they've been going since September. look,
Oh, I'm going to
potentially
cut one more thing. I'm sorry. One thing I was going to say, I forgot. We will be doing an after show on this. I haven't quite yet settled on. We're talking about the format, but we're going to do an after show. Anyone who wants to join us and talk about this more, we will be doing it. We're going to start setting that up now, but I wanted to announce that so that anyone who's scheduling and says, "Oh, would like to stick around later," we are going to do one, and we're working on the production of that right now. But I'm sorry for cutting you off, and please continue.
No, all good. Look, worst case scenario for us would be that it would run into autumn, or sorry, fall for you guys in the US, which for us is sort of probably April. I don't think it will go that long, but realistically, I'm guessing. Look, as far as the economic impact, where we're lucky is most of our population is centered in the major cities. And most of our primary, I guess, exports are mining. So coal, nickel, uranium, which isn't in areas that are necessarily affected by the fire. So the overall Australian economy will be fine. Where there is issues is there's a little town called Batlow. So for anyone who wants to look it up, Batlow. Now, Batlow is in the Snowy Mountain region, which is it's in southern New South Wales towards the Victorian border and inland. Now, Batlow is a town of around about 1,500 people that produces I couldn't tell you the percentage, but it would be a large percentage of the apples in Australia. So in Australia, Batlow apples are a fairly famous sort of thing. Now, the town of Batlow has been sort of under siege. They've only just been able to get back in there today. It looks as though all the orchards, with a few exceptions, are decimated. There's parts of the town that have been decimated. The majority of it has survived. They actually did manage to save most of the town, which is great. But unfortunately, for a town like that, so with 1,500 people, the employment in that town, it's going to be something that's going to be very hard to recover from. We had the Deputy Prime Minister, who's actually from that region. He was saying that a lot of the orchards will take, they can regrow, but it's going to take 20 years for them to regrow to the point they were before. Now, not only does that, even though it's a small town of 1,500, a lot of the towns that surround rely on that for everything from transport to getting the apples in, working in the orchards, I guess accommodation for seasonal workers. So the surrounding economy for that region will be greatly affected. With the south coast of New South Wales, the main economy down there is tourism, mainly tourism from Sydney. It's the thing to do if it's a long weekend or holidays. A lot of people will go down the coast. So those regions that are relying on the tourism, this tourist season obviously has been, there's nothing they can do there. But while they're rebuilding, and even I guess there'll be that little bit of fear, there is a bit of a push to make sure that that people do, once everything's back up and running, to really get down to these regions, go and spend some money, and really just sort of keep the economies going. But look, overall for Australia, it'll hurt us a little bit, but not a huge amount. But certainly for a lot of these smaller economies, it's going to absolutely decimate them, and for a long time. I'd be honestly surprised if a town like Batlow survives, because I mean, it's when you've got 1,500 people who have basically all just lost jobs. There's not really a lot around apart from a few other larger towns that are maybe
So
half
it
an
could
hour
straight
to
up
an hour.
ghost town some of these places.
Yeah, and look, it's those. There's going to be unemployment, that flow-on effect with the unemployment in a lot of those towns that rely on it. So it's I guess the option, unfortunately, for a lot of these people is going to be to completely up and move, which is sad. I've had a bit to do with Batlow, and when I saw that was the town that's probably really copped it worse of the inland towns, and it was really, I guess, knowing what the town means to I guess that region, and even as far as things like the Batlow apple it's something that's synonymous with Australia.
We do have two more super chats, Mr. President. Another 5 some currency.
It's foreign.
Somebody stated here. Yeah, I don't care what the currency is. Why doesn't the U.S. military help? It's the biggest worldwide, and such there is. And such this is good karma. Then again, there's no oil. Okay, I saw what you did there. If the mods could just, quietly do something about him,
No, I
would
mean,
appreciate it.
I'd like to answer that real quick. There has actually
well, and I'd like to get to that. So I would like to see the answer to that. And so that's the first one. Then the other super chat was Dave. Well, Wolf, don't the Chinese own all the dollars now, and he did that for €2. So and nobody saw what I just did there. At any rate, I'm sorry, Ansgar. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, there's actually been a rather large push to get the U.S. involved, and so far, from what I understand, other than a few, like, oh, we'll send some people to donate blood and stuff like that, there really hasn't been much of a response, not from the federal government, anyways.
Well, number one, we couldn't get the firefighting equipment down there. That would be a little bit too difficult. We have sent a couple of dozen firefighters, but the Australian military has stepped up. They have been very involved in fighting this, as far as sending transportation and that sort of thing, getting the helicopters involved. Australia has a lot of different assets as far as fighting fires technologically. They don't use they use helicopters and water buckets. That's always a good idea, except for the fact that Australia doesn't have a lot of large lakes and reservoirs, and that is where usually the helicopters fill up their buckets. One of the problems is that sometimes the closest water source is the ocean. And sure, you can fill up plenty of buckets out of there. The problem is you do not want to be dumping salt water on this land. That's a real last resort sort of thing.
What happens if you dump the salt water on the land?
You get salt on, and it has a tendency. If you use too much, it has a tendency to sterilize the soil. So nothing.
So the salt would get into the
grow.
soil, and basically
yeah.
you'd kill, like, in perpetuity. I mean, you'd kill for 50 years at a minimum.
Unless it's soaked out, it has to seep out.
Okay. Yeah. So
it would, but yeah, you would hinder growth. That's going to come there later. They have the fire troll, the dropping of the fire retardant, which is pretty effective, but they use much smaller planes than we do in the United States. In the U.S., we've got the 707, and the DC, I forgot the number of it, that comes and scoops water and then drops it, and that creates a huge amount of water that's dropped. The problem is Australia doesn't have the big lakes that big of a plane needs, that big of a jet to come down and scoop up and take off. It would have to do it on the ocean, and then again, that's another problem with that. But the military, from what I understand, the Australian military has stepped up and are really doing a good job as far as transportation and helping evacuation, and that's what they should be doing.
I think if the US military were to get involved, there isn't really a lot they can do. I mean, at the end of the day, we've got to stop the fires. We do have the resources in Australia. We've got a very good modern military. Not the size of the US, but certainly on par as far as what we've got technology.
Are you saying that we can't? Is that there's something the U.S. can't kill with bombs and missiles?
Yeah. Now wait a minute here. Our military. Maybe you haven't heard, but our military is the best military. If our military can't go in and shoot the living daylights out of that fire, I don't know who can.
There is a group of Greens down in Australia that I was reading about earlier this week, who are asking to have the fire bombed. There is experiments that have been done in physics, even at my alma mater, George Mason University, of using sound waves to put out fires. There are physical properties of sound waves that actually will put out a fire, and they're saying, let's drop sonic bombs on these fires and try to put them out. The problem is you're dropping bombs on fires. This is not a good formula. Anything that's going to help that's going to help the embers move around. And it's even dropping water buckets on fire. There's a danger of spreading those embers around, having them pop up, fly around, and land elsewhere. Tom had a question about pine cones, which we don't have. They didn't have a lot of in Australia, but we do have them in the northern forests. Pine cones will start fires. Pine cones are very sappy. They will burn, and they tend to roll downhill. And so we were trained to look for pine cones on fire, rolling downhill and starting fires downhill. The problem is a lot of different trees put out cones, put out seeds that have to be opened up by fire. That fire is a natural part of their procreation. If you can get that. So we know that fire is normal. We also were trained to watch for burning creatures. A deer on fire can spread a fire elsewhere, and I'm sure the same thing could be said for a kangaroo.
I want to make a quick clarification. Ilya Moon, by the way, for $5 says U.S. firefighters have been sent to go help the firefighters, which yes. If you notice, what I said was the federal government hasn't sent much. These firefighters were sent by state governments. And she sent me an article. Apparently, a little over 100 firefighters have been sent from our different state governments, which is awesome. That they're
and our military can go and shoot flaming deer. You see, that's the thing. That's where our military can help. I think people have been, I don't know. You know what? Okay. Now I don't like. He's on my list too. People are really starting to get big me with this reality stuff. I say there are deer there. There's deer there. So.
Oh, we've got deer. We've got deer, just not a lot.
So you're contradicting yourself now. You're contradicting yourself, contradicting me.
We were trained to. We were told that if you see a burning deer, to whack it with your shovels.
That is easy to not do. Something you expect to have to be an instruction at any job. If you see a flaming deer, whack it with a shovel.
Yeah.
Update her titled Dr. Misha Deer Whacker Griffith. Good. We got another one. We're going to have a new title for her. There's some running stuff. There's Tony, who's always getting in trouble in our live chat and really hasn't been blocked enough times on our. And now there is a new title for we've got the Deer Whacker with us.
Just to quickly speak into the stuff on the U.S. federal government. Look, there's not really a lot that the U.S. federal government can do. I know our Prime Minister has sort of come out and said that Trump called and I know he's not overly popular, but credit to him, he has offered support. But look, as far as we're a wealthy country, we're not a poor country. We do have the finances and the resources, and Australians have been digging deep. So as far as the financial side of things, we're covered. The Prime Minister just announced $2 billion for communities to recover. As an initial package, and basically said, and if it has to be more, there'll be more. So there's not really a lot that I guess, apart from offering thoughts and support, and there's not really a lot that other people can do apart from send firefighters over.
Well, and Ilya Moon brought up another point. Why would we help Australia if we didn't help Puerto Rico? Obviously, Ilya Moon has forgotten. We don't help countries where they don't speak English natively. So, that's why we didn't help Puerto Rico, is because.
And have you heard that Australian accent? Clearly, that is not English.
Well, no, but no, would be willing to help Australia, but Puerto Rico, they don't speak English. That country doesn't speak English. Sorry, what?
So we've sort of covered like the human and the economical cost of all this. What is the cost to the wildlife, to the local ecology?
Well, I believe the latest count is 500 million animals dead. Koalas are probably the
Jesus.
ones who cop it the worst. Look, koalas are a lazy, slow-moving animal that basically they eat the eucalyptus leaves and they essentially get stoned off it. So they tend to not do too much. So look, the everything the wildlife will recover because unfortunately this is, or fortunately or unfortunately, this is something that does occur on a regular basis in Australia. So it's the animals have been dealing with it for 50,000 years, or more. Yeah, we're not going to see mass extinctions. It certainly will have a short term impact, but yeah, I think it's sort of a lot of, I guess, what's being reported is probably maybe might be sort of beaten up a little bit for the media.
Now, I did hear that while there isn't going to be mass extinctions per se, that their habitat is gone, and so they are effectively extinct until it grows back and they can be introduced. Is that
They
accurate, or is that?
they grow back very quick.
Okay.
They grow back, yeah, extremely quick. We've got our wildlife management once again in Australia, because we have to. It's world class. So we've got a lot of organisations that look after animals. We've got a lot of sanctuaries for animals. There's a lot of different areas that aren't affected. I mean, there is a lot of areas that are affected, but what you've got to keep in mind is the actual size of Australia does mean that there are other areas that we can move a lot of these animals to.
All right, Dr. Griffith, since you basically know everything about every topic we could possibly cover, did you want to weigh in on this, or you're awfully quiet for no? And by the way, I didn't mention this earlier, but she was like getting lots of love just like about a hour ago. People were like, oh my God, she's so amazing! It's like, oh God,
Because
we're
she
gonna do
is. Move
a
over,
No,
Indiana Jones.
I know,
I
Indiana Griffith.
well,
Okay,
we absolutely adored Australia. I mean, we went for the scenery and for the animals, and we got out and we saw. I wish I could figure out how to share my pictures because I have beautiful pictures of kangaroos and koalas, and we saw everything but wombats, I think, um, and platypi, platypuses, those duck-billed things.
Yeah,
Um,
platypus, yeah.
Yeah, but that's what's so fascinating about Australia, and I think the animals, using the animals and saying, "Oh, the animals are dying," is a way to get attention, definitely, and a way to get people to care, frankly. And if it increases donations and helps people and helps Australians, yeah, uh,
We'll take it.
at the same time, I think we should be helping Australians for Australians, not because they are koala keepers.
Right.
So definitely, missing out on the critters is horrible, but we have to think about people first, and think about how to keep them safe. I am surprised that the death count is so low. I am pleased,
Mm.
inordinately pleased, and I think it's a credit to the Australians that they know how to take care of people and get them out of harm's way. And I hope they can keep people coming out and getting out of harm's way. But you know, it's if you got to have pictures of cute animals to get money, then that's what you got to do.
I will say that's mildly cynical, but the first place I went to was far more cynical than that, which was really, according to the U.S. government, Australians aren't people. The only people are Americans. Everybody else is just, but so I went a step more cynical. I'm sorry. Trump is really starting to, got
Wow.
into that discussion about Iran too. And they're like, well, who cares what happens in Iran? Because it's human beings, maybe.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I know that's a really radical notion. Oh my God.
What are we going to
Come
do
on,
with you, Nick?
man. Why would you care?
You
Come on.
you saw that discussion too.
Yeah,
That
I
one headed
did.
out real fast, where they were just like, it's perfectly okay if they're killing everybody, and if they make a nuke and they hit Israel and Israel hits back, you know what? That's great. Let them end it. And I was just like, wow.
Let them sort it out themselves. Yeah.
Let them sort it out themselves. To which, by the way, there is some merit to let them sort it out themselves. But I'm still kind of against nuclear war, even in a quote limited theater.
Yes,
All right.
but we also
Yeah.
can't we also can't deliver democracy at the end of a bayonet
No.
either.
No, we
So-
can't.
Yeah, no, we can't. Well, and the closest, and this is, and we had, and by the way, as much as I really wanted to throw Dr. Griffith under the bus, we had spoken to her right before going live on our last show and wanted her opinion on what was going on, because we were doing breaking news and we always do value her opinion. And she had, I had thought that a lot of what was going on with us getting expelled from Iraq was in many ways a negative thing for a number of reasons, and she was able to really reframe it in a way that was very helpful. I reiterated that conversation and her views on the air. I hope I did them justice.
Oh, you
but,
did fine.
Oh, well, I was actually, I know I did fine. I just wanted to see if you watched the show or not. But what was I going to say? Oh, shoot. I forget where I was going with that.
Well,
Anyways,
we should probably cover this on the after show, to be honest.
yeah, so we're going to do an after show, but there was something specific I wanted to, and I've completely spaced it. Never mind. Yeah, so we're going to do an after show. We're getting the links on the Discord. In fact, Mr. McGinnis has already dropped the Discord link. So we're going to do the after show on the Discord. And anyone who wants to come in, come on in. We're all going to be chatting away on this topic, and we sincerely appreciate you guys coming. Was there anything else?
Yeah,
oh, yes, please.
Yeah, there was one other thing. I think it kind of is the elephant in the room on this one, and I'd like to get both of our guests takes in, kind of independently. We can start with Misha. We can go but what is the impact of climate change on these particular fires? I mean, obviously climate change can't start a fire, but what has been the impact?
This scientist I was reading this morning on Twitter was basically saying that the two elements that climate change brings to this is temperature and fuel. And that is really, there's it's not a triad, it's a quadrad of what you need to have fire. And climate change is just making it worse. And it doesn't have to be an Anthropocene, human driven. Oh, it's snowing. Oh well, human driven ideas of climate change. The climate is changing. Accept it and try to figure it out. And just the smokes from these fires are going to have long-term problems for a lot of people, not only health-wise, but throughout the rest of the world. Remember, there's upper air currents that the smoke is getting into that's going to be affecting the weather elsewhere. So we're all tied together in this. I think that is the real important thing to understand about this. Yes, it's a fire in Australia, but it's going to be giving us some real severe weather conditions down the road. So we have to be cognizant of this and cognizant of the fact that we're going to get bigger fires, more dangerous fires, and we have to be prepared for them.
Well, that's why the wall is so important.
Well,
Chris,
I'm thankful for the Great Pacific Fire Break.
Yeah, that helps too. I'd like to see it jump that.
Yeah.
Hey, don't just don't.
Yeah.
Hold my beer.
When Trump's done with the environment, don't worry, it'll be well. That was the other first thought. As soon as you said climate change can't cause fires, I'm sitting there going, well, Trump's not done yet, but we'll see.
Oh wow. Yeah.
The Earth will spontaneously combust. Chris, did you have any thoughts on this? Or
Look, I guess what I would say is I'm going to preface this by saying I am absolutely not a scientist. I am not scientifically inclined in any way. I'm same as Dr. Griffith. I'm a historian. So this isn't my area of expertise. All I can do is, I guess, talk about how this compares to other summers. Look, the temperature hasn't necessarily been hotter. We do get hot days. We've just every 10 to 15 years, we will have a drought. This isn't the first drought in my lifetime. It won't be the last drought in my lifetime. I think what really has exacerbated these fires is a series of the droughts taking the moisture out of the eucalyptus, combined with hot days and wind. And that's the thing. If we have a hot day and we have fire, we can manage it. It's when the wind hits that really causes us the issue. So I don't know if wind is necessarily a result of climate change. Certainly, it has been a hot summer, not the hottest we've had, but it has been a hot summer. Obviously, I would imagine with all the garbage that's being put in the air now, there is going to be a global impact. What that is, I'm not too sure. I don't want to pretend I'm a scientist because I'm not.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Do you
All
have
right,
anything to add, Nick?
I don't, but I did want to know if any of you guys have sort of any last words on this in general before we wrap it up. And again, we dropped the Discord a couple times, and a couple people are already showing up. So, but did you guys have any sort of final thoughts on this before we go?
Well, I wanted to express my thanks to Chris for staying up really, really, really late
Oh Jesus, yeah. What
and
time is it over
helping us.
there?
It's just gone 4 a.m.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Thank you.
He has done a yeoman's job of being up and informing on us, and I really wanted to have someone from Australia on the show. And I hope his family is safe, and I hope you make it through okay. But I certainly appreciate that you've been here, and very thankful that you were.
And look, I guess something I'd like to say, and I guess I don't want to speak on behalf of the entire country, but I'm going to. We're really thankful for the support. Why not? Hey,
Oh, you're
why
awesome,
not?
man.
Why not? We're really thankful for all the support that we're getting, not only from the governments, but from just the average person. Like the amount of messages I've gotten from friends of mine and people who are I know on Twitter, or various other social platforms, expressing concern and giving good wishes, as well as a lot of the donations that are coming in that will really go to help sort of rebuild these smaller economies. Look, I guess as Australians, like we're really blown away, and we're so thankful that that the world's got our back, because it is scary. It's bringing us together, but it is a real scary time for us here. So, thank you, really genuinely from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you so much to everyone who, whether it's money, kind words, or even, I'm not the religious type, but if people have got us in their thoughts and prayers, well, we appreciate that too.
That's awesome.
All right.
And thank you honestly for giving us a sort of cultural look at what's going on, and sort of a very human, on the ground look. We've got your Twitter in the description. Is there any other way people can get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I've got a YouTube channel. So Atheist Pastor. If you go to my Twitter, the links are all there, but it's youtube.com/Atheist Pastor. I normally get together with a few other atheist YouTubers, and we'll live stream and talk religion, politics, and on a Friday night we all have a few drinks, and you can gradually watch a bunch of Australians start from making a lot of sense and talking about serious topics to getting a little messy sort of 3 hours into it. So it's always entertaining just for that. So, but yeah, look, anyone who wants to send me a message to ask sort of what's going on or get a better understanding, yeah, more than happy to answer. Probably not straight away, because I do plan to go to bed fairly shortly, because my 3-year-old probably will be jumping on me at 6:30, which is only 2.5 hours away.
Okay, quick question before we go to our outro then. If people get a hold of you on Twitter, can they ask you for credible and reputable charities that will actually help people?
Yeah, look, the one I'll tell you, the one to donate to is the RFS. So I can get the link, but it's It's rfs.nsw.gov.au. You'll also be able to see exactly where the fires are. You can zoom in. You can see, which ones are out of control, which ones are in control. I actually did put the link in our private chat here for the fires near me, but you can donate through that's probably the best one to donate through, and that will go to New South Wales, shared with Victoria and the other states where it's needed as well. That's the one most of us are donating to. Organisations like the Red Cross are fantastic as well. They're probably the best ones to. But send me a message and I won't get back to you straight away tonight or today or whatever it is, wherever you are. But I will happily get back to anyone and anyone who can help. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. And Dr. Griffith, was there anything you wanted to talk about or plug or anything before we go?
Oh, well, last year, Jerry and I did a show on our channel, History Unsettled, talking about the origins of the Forest Service and management of forestry, the argument between John Muir and Gifford Pinchot that happened in the early part of the 20th century. So you can see that program if you go to History Unsettled. And it's in the library, and we shot a lot of it, or some of it, on location at the fires that had happened in Shasta County just after it, so you can see what fire devastation really looks like. And I was kind of proud of that show. That was a good show. Other than that, thank you so much, Nick and Ansgar, for having us on and for bringing this to everybody's attention.
Yeah, thanks,
well,
guys.
thank you very much for coming. And I did also want to point out, we do have a slight scheduling change. We were going to do today at 2 p.m. Eastern. Red's Rhetoric was going to come on to discuss the space program, but unfortunately we've had to reschedule that. So we're going to work on that, and we'll update our calendar and let everyone know as soon as we know. But that was supposed to be later today, and as of this moment, we are postponing it. So do apologize to those of you looking forward to it. Ansgar, I know you really wanted to do it. I was looking forward to it. So, but we're going to postpone that for now. But otherwise, we look forward to seeing you all in the Discord in just a few minutes.
See you on Discord, everybody.